face to face. An optimistic President Trump meets in Vietnam for a second summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. We'll have the latest. Capitol Hill grilling. The president's former attorney provides explosive testimony before lawmakers. Michael Cohen calls the president a cheat and a con man. Behind bars, as Cardinal George Pell spends his first night in prison in Australia, the Vatican says it's investigating him. And fear no evil. Pope Francis has a message of encouragement for the faithful. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, February 27th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump says he hopes to solve a lot of issues during his meetings with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The two began their second summit in Vietnam with handshakes and smiles. The future of North Korea's nuclear weapons program hangs in the balance. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports from the North Lawn. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. President Trump and Kim Jong-un shared a friendly dinner and private conversation today. The president calling it a very good dialogue. The world waiting to see if their relationship can pave the way to peace.
President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un meet again. The cameras capturing the stage set in Vietnam with the possibility to build on their historic first meeting in Singapore.
I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one.
The North Korean leader tracking the time since they last met. He notes 261 days have passed and says this second meeting gives hope for success with time, adding he will really try to make that happen. The definition of success for Mr. Kim remains unclear. For President Trump, it would mean a North Korea free of nuclear weapons. He believes it could bring a bright future for the dictator.
I think that your country has tremendous economic potential, unbelievable, unlimited. And I think that you will have a tremendous future with your country.
But reports continue to show North Korea is growing its nuclear arsenal, and U.S. intelligence officials have testified the country plans to keep its weapons of mass destruction.
And is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons and production capabilities.
Still, Chairman Kim hasn't conducted a missile test since 2017, and President Trump went from promising fire and fury upon North Korea to praising the bond he says the two men have formed.
Our relationship is a very special relationship.
Tomorrow is really the big day for this summit. President Trump has a number of meetings with Chairman Kim, and then they are scheduled to sign a joint agreement. But the real question, what will be in it? Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. While the president is halfway around the world, his former personal attorney provided explosive testimony today before lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Michael Cohen says he regrets the work he did for Trump, and he hurled epithets.
I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
Cohen also says the president knew ahead of time WikiLeaks had damaging emails about Hillary Clinton's campaign. Republicans like Jim Jordan of Ohio called Cohen a pathological liar, noting he's going to prison after being convicted of lying to Congress. The White House responds saying it's pathetic to give Cohen another opportunity to spread his lies. U.S. Supreme Court justices today seemed willing to rule in favor of keeping a cross on public land. Justices heard oral arguments. Conservatives and two liberal justices suggested the nearly 100-year-old memorial does not run contrary to the Constitution. The American Legion put up the Peace Cross to honor those killed during World War I. Correspondent Jason Calvi reports.
Thomas Fenwick is one of 49 World War I casualties honored on this cross in Bladensburg, Maryland. Marianne LeQuay is his niece.
You know, every time I go by, I remember him. You know, this would be lost if it was taken away.
Driving up this road from D.C. to Maryland, you can't miss the Peace Cross. It's a 40-foot memorial. But the American Humanist Association, a group that includes atheists and agnostics, says it breaks the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So they want the cross removed or changed, or this land transferred to private property.
The Christian cross dominates the landscape, almost making the town appear as though it's a Christian enclave. And it's also not just offensive to people driving by, it's incredibly discompassionate to our veterans, both Christian and non-Christian, to suggest that a Christian cross is the appropriate way for a government to honor their service.
The Trump administration, Maryland leaders, and the American Legion defend the cross, saying it's not an endorsement of religion.
It represents the 49 veterans who served and gave the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our nation. They happen to be Christians. They were black and white soldiers who gave their lives, and they were laid to rest together.
For Marianne, it's a lasting salute.
It would be a desecration of a memorial to my uncle. It would be a big loss. I go by it all the time. I only live a mile away.
The Supreme Court's decision on the fate of this cross is expected by June. In Maryland, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
2 Catholic bishops in Virginia say they are dismayed and outraged that a bill to protect children who survive an abortion was blocked this week by Senate Democrats. In a joint statement, Bishop Barry Nestout of Richmond and Bishop Michael Burbidge of Arlington say, quote, that this bill did not pass unanimously, let alone even pass at all, is appalling and beyond comprehension. They also urge senators to hold another vote immediately. Rhode Island's Attorney General is reviewing allegations of sexual abuse by the state's Catholic priests. The Diocese of Providence says it plans to release later this year the names of clergy credibly accused of misconduct, and its leaders are committed to safety, justice, and healing. In Nebraska, officials have subpoenaed more than 400 Catholic churches and institutions seeking records related to sexual abuse of children. The Archdiocese of Omaha last year released a list of 38 priests credibly accused of misconduct, saying all of them either had died or been removed from clergy. The head of the Vatican's Commission on Dealing with Clergy Who Father Children says the good of the child needs to come first. In an interview with Vatican News, Cardinal Beniamino Stella says in part, quote, a situation of this kind is considered irreversible and requires the priest to abandon the clerical state even if he considers himself fit for ministry. The cardinal also says less than 2% of all cases of priests who leave the ministry are because they fathered a child. Cardinal George Pell's bail is revoked, prompting him to spend his first night in an Australia prison. A van transported the 77-year-old cardinal to the Melbourne Assessment Prison. Earlier today, the Australian cardinal arrived at court for sentencing after being convicted of sexually assaulting 2 choir boys more than 20 years ago. The judge announced sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. Joining me now is Hannah Brockhouse, senior Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Hannah, Cardinal Pell is in prison, and the Vatican today says it's going to conduct its own canonical investigation. Was this expected?
Well, it is normal for the CDF, or the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, to wait to do a canonical trial or canonical investigation until after civil trial proceedings have finished. So we do expect them to take some of the evidence from the civil trial against Cardinal Pell in the use of their investigation. We're not sure how long that process will take. We're awaiting some decisions from the CDF with the permission of Pope Francis, and we await those results.
And the CDF is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the group within the Vatican that investigates sex abuse. Now, does this at all compare to our case here in the U.S. of the defrocked ex-Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, who also was found guilty of sex abuse?
Well, I don't think it's totally fair to compare the two. Former Cardinal McCarrick never went on the record publicly about being innocent of the crimes that he was found guilty of by a canonical trial. He also didn't undergo a civil trial like Cardinal Pell has.
And Cardinal Pell came out and did deny the charges. He is going to appeal. His lawyer says he didn't do it, but he did not appear on the stand. So what did the Australian judge, Peter Kidd, say today in court in front of Cardinal Pell?
Well, Cardinal Pell has been adamant from the beginning and publicly about his innocence of these charges. And today the judge told Pell that he thought he was being brazen and callous and that he was guilty of a breach of trust.
So the next steps are what?
The next steps are March 13th will be the sentencing hearing for Cardinal Pell, and we await as well the results of the appeal that he is filing with his lawyer.
Thank you so much for the update. Hannah Brockhouse, senior Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency.
Thank you, Lauren.
The head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church says Pope Benedict Emeritus prays for peace every day in the Ukraine. The two met yesterday at the retired Pope's residence, and the Pope Emeritus recalled with affection the former head of the Ukrainian Church. The two talked about the situation in Ukraine. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is the largest of the 23 churches linked to Rome, but with their own jurisdiction. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte says the Catholic Church will disappear in 25 years. Local media reports say the priests target nuns and young boys, and quote, "Who needs a religion like that?" A spokesman later said the president was only providing healthy criticism. Tensions reach an all-time high between India and Pakistan. The Pakistani military admits to shooting down 2 Indian warplanes and capturing their pilots. Now world leaders and local Catholics there are calling for restraint and praying the nuclear-armed rivals will not go to war. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he's talking with his counterparts in India and Pakistan, reminding them both they want the same thing, security and peace. The U.S., China, and the European Union all agree the two sides must talk to each other in order to avoid a military conflict.
Flames rise from the wreckage of a downed Indian aircraft. Pakistan's military says its Air Force shot down this plane and one other. This man says he was inside his home when he heard a loud bang, then came outside to see everything destroyed. The crash happened in a disputed area between India and Pakistan called Kashmir. The two sides have fought over the area for decades. Part of Kashmir is controlled by India and part by Pakistan. Today, Pakistan released this video of what it claims to be an Indian pilot who was captured.
So, Wing Commander, you hail from which place in India? Am I supposed to tell you this, Major? I'm sorry. I'm from down south. You're from down south? Yeah.
India said it expects an immediate and safe return of the pilot. In a TV announcement, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan extended an offer to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi for talks to de-escalate rising tensions. The recent violence began 2 weeks ago after a suicide car bomb in Kashmir killed 40 Indian soldiers. India accused Pakistan of having a hand in helping the rebel group who carried out the attack. India responded by launching airstrikes in the Pakistani-controlled area. As top diplomats from around the world urge restraint, Catholics are praying for peace. A Vatican news agency reports a group of Capuchin Franciscan friars from Pakistan made a pilgrimage to the border of India, saying war would only bring hatred, pain, and destruction.
The region of Kashmir also has a history of religious violence, mostly between Muslims and Hindus, but religious minorities like Christians have also been victims of violence by extremists. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Coming up, analysis of President Trump's declaration of a national emergency and a bipartisan solution. As expected, the House of Representatives has passed legislation putting a stop to President Trump's request for billions of dollars for a U.S.-Mexico border wall. 13 Republicans joined Democrats to block the president's national emergency declaration. The measure now goes before the Senate. Joining me now is Jason Grumet, founder and president of the Bipartisan Policy Center. Jason, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Loved your tweet. You said the national emergency isn't at the southern border. It's in Washington, D.C., careening from crisis to crisis. And it's no way to run a soda stand, let alone a superpower. Immigration has been a touchstone of U.S. politics for so long. We couldn't solve it under Bush. We couldn't solve it under Obama. Here we are now with Trump. So what's the bipartisan solution?
So, the good news is that there actually are a number of ideas that the vast majority of the public can stand behind. The problem is that literally the president and the Congress have to get over the wall before we can have that real policy debate. And the emergency declaration is not helping the process move forward.
Well, if both parties are playing to their base, then how do we get bipartisanship?
So, the fundamental basis of bipartisanship is having people who have principled disagreements respect each other enough to have a conversation.
Okay, that ain't happening.
Well, it's happening in some quieter places. And while the, deal that Congress put together to keep government open, the, $1.5 billion for border security wasn't a giant breakthrough, it was an actual agreement. And so the president kind of doing an end run and now saying, well, I didn't like your conclusion, Congress, I'm going to take my marbles and go home, is going to diminish the ability to move forward.
Well, many people are saying it's an end run. So are we in a situation where Democrats are accusing Trump of exceeding his authority just as Republicans accused Obama of the same?
Absolutely. And it speaks to a broader point. I was saying this is kind of the beginning of the limit of the incredibly shrinking Congress. For the last couple of decades, Congress has been giving over more and more authority to the executive branch. President Obama used executive orders on the Dreamer program, which was an exaggeration of presidential authority. This end around, I think, is really quite egregious. And so there is a need for Congress to remember that the Constitution puts them first. And it's not just on immigration. Congress hasn't taken its responsibility on the authorization of use of military force. They're not doing the kind of oversight that they need to be doing. So I think this really speaks to the broader issue. But on immigration, you could put together an agreement that dealt with border security, dealt with the Dreamers, dealt with the people who have temporary status. Those are symmetrical issues that could fit together, and they have to get beyond kind of this silly debate to get back to that real discussion.
But I still come back to it saying we see the president meet with what he calls Chuck and Nancy. They can't come to an agreement. Yes, we have this sort of temporary agreement to fund the government, but it's not a comprehensive immigration agreement. And my question to the head and the founder of the Bipartisan Policy Center is, how do you get there?
So, politics is a momentum sport, and it's built on trust just like any other human interaction. And we have to start actually having some moderate successes. I think Congress and the president could come to an agreement around border security and around the Dreamers. That was on the table several times. We got real close. I think that is still there, and that is a first step. If we could make that kind of progress, you could then see the broader discussion about what you do with the existing undocumented population. There is agreement that we need our immigration system to be more about the economic needs of the country. You hear both Democrats and Republicans acknowledging that. And so, it's a baby step process, but we're certainly not going to get there if we have, the two institutions essentially refusing to work with each other. And that's what I think is happening now with this emergency declaration.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jason Grumet, founder and president of the Bipartisan Policy Center.
Pleasure to be with you.
The second largest Protestant denomination in the country says it will not recognize same-sex marriage and the ordination of LGBT clergy. The decisions came at the United Methodist Church Conference in St. Louis. Delegates defeated a proposal that would have let regional and local bodies decide same-sex policies for themselves, saying they instead wanted to follow teaching from the Bible. The church faces a likely surge in defections. Up next, why Pope Francis says evil's days are numbered. Turkey's foreign minister expresses his concern over China's treatment of Uyghurs and other Muslim communities. Appearing before the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, he urged Chinese authorities to ensure freedom of religion and the preservation of the cultural identities of the Uyghurs and other Muslims in that country. Joining me now is Leila Gilbert, an adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute Center for Religious Freedom. Leila, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
How significant is it that Turkey is speaking out against China about this issue of religious freedom?
It's unusual. Most of the Muslim countries have been rather quiet about it. I think that President Erdogan probably sees this as an opportunity to elevate his importance. And certainly there should be concern about the Uyghurs from all over the world.
Well, of course there should. I mean, the Chinese government denies it, but the U.S. State Department says that, since April 2017, the government has detained between 800,000 and more than 2 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Muslims in political re-education camps to combat terrorism. And what you have said is that China's treatment of the Uyghur Muslims could signal China's plans for other faith groups there. There are 10 to 12 million Catholics, for example.
Right, and many more evangelicals. And there are other groups, the Falun Gong. There are groups suffering badly, the Tibetan Buddhists as well. But yes, I think this is a lesson to us all, because the technology that's being used against the Uyghurs is pretty up to date.
Explain that to us.
Well, they're doing DNA testing. They are creating files on each of these people to see what they're up to. And they're using facial recognition software.
Like where they're going, and they're tracking
them constantly. They even move people into their homes at times during, for example, Ramadan, to keep an eye on certain leaders to see if they're keeping the fast at Ramadan. So it's been extremely intense, and yes, some of the Christians are experiencing this too.
It's interesting you say that, because I read that in December, Catholic Little Helper app was completely blocked by the Chinese. People went to it one day in December, and it was gone, and they used it to watch Mass, to look at homilies, daily Bible readings, etc. In the provisional agreement between China and the Vatican, there are many who believe that the more the Vatican negotiates with China, there will be instances like this, and that political suppression of other minorities will happen.
Oh, I think that's true. I don't think we can count on any agreement making much difference, because the mentality of the Chinese communists from the top down is extremely controlling and totalitarian, and they don't keep anybody's rules.
And we lifted tariffs from the Chinese. How do you reconcile, I have a hard time with this, how do you reconcile dealing with countries that have such severe human rights abuses and continuing to negotiate with them?
I think there's been a dream or an idea that it would make them better if they were more exposed to the West. I think this started when they sort of, after Nixon visited, and everybody thought, well, once they see how free we are and how we live, then they'll change. And I think there's sort of a hangover of that in the State Department and here and there. From my point of view is that they should be penalized for the way they treat other people. But then you say, well, is America the policeman of the world? So, I just want to speak up for the people that are persecuted.
For the people who are persecuted.
I
understand. Thank you so much for joining us, Leila Gilbert of the Hudson Institute Center for Religious Freedom. Finally, tonight, Pope Francis tells the faithful not to worry, because prayer drives away fear, and evil is not eternal.
La preghiera scaccia ogni timore. Il Padre ci ama.
At his weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says the devil is afraid because God is so much stronger. He also says holiness and good works cause numerous ripples and waves, like a stone being tossed into a pond. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.